Hello and welcome to the lecture on the immune system. This lecture, you will see, is changing pretty often because the immune system is complex and it can be a challenge to learn it. And so I am continually updating these slides and the videos. And so what you will see is as you go through the videos, the slide numbers might not match. And in some cases, a little bit of the writing on a slide won't match perfectly, but you'll be okay if you've watched the videos or if you read the slides. Either way, you'll get the same information, just maybe presented slightly differently. So this first video on the immune system is going to look at an overview of it, very, very broad overview, and major themes you'll encounter when you study the immune system. The immune system has a lot of parts to learn, and you have to kind of put them together to understand how it works. If our ultimate goal is to describe an immune response and how it's supposed to work, then we need to know all the parts that contribute to it and how they work together. And they're not things we think about very often. They're not working in ways we often just think of cells working or tissues or organs working. So we have to kind of think of them in a different way. And so this first video is going to show you the themes that will get you thinking in the right way. So let's get into it. In this lecture, overall, you're trying to learn the parts of the immune system that protect us from bacteria, fungi, and viruses. Notice I'm not saying parasites, I'm not saying worms, because different parts of the immune system protect us against those, but in this class we really focus on microorganisms. So we focus on the most common pathogens, the bacteria, the viruses, and to some extent the fungi. So that is what it is. And then the real major challenge for you is going to be learning the adaptive immune system in detail. That's where the tricky concepts come in, and we will get there. And so we are building towards that with every video. Whether we're talking about the innate immune system or themes or pattern recognition, we are always working towards understanding that adaptive immune response. So let's get to it. So, as I've mentioned, the immune system is complex. Now you could think of the brain as being more complex because the individual neurons might have 10,000 synapses, and we don't know the whole organization, and that's absolutely true. But we can learn more about the immune system. Because the immune system, you don't have to necessarily take it apart to study it. You can pull out a single cell without hurting the person, and you can study that cell in glorious detail. So what we've found is that every cell comes in a lot of different versions, and every signaling molecule comes in different versions, and every receptor you could identify on a cell comes in many versions. Also, it goes through these developmental processes. Every cell starts in one way and ends up in a different way, and that development is part of the immune responses. That development isn't just something that happens when we are a fetus. That is something that may happen during an infection, or it may happen at some time when we are an adolescent. So that developmental stuff is key to understanding the immune system. And what we're not going to look at it very much, but the genetics leading to it is unique. There are things that happen with DNA in the cells of immune cells that don't happen in any other cell in the body. So another thing I want to point out is if you've learned the immune system in another class or in another textbook, chances are it's been a real challenge to see the big picture of how it works. In my experience, if you've learned it from an anatomy point of view or a physiology point of view, you may have learned what a lot of the cells do, but if you haven't put it together, it's really, really hard to figure out how an immune response works. And so that's our goal, is putting it together and giving you that big picture idea. And at the bottom here, I say we will scratch the surface of the immune system. The immune system is complicated enough that I can confidently say no one on earth understands it all. No one can name every cell. No one can name every signaling molecule, because we always discover more. Let's get into it. So, these are some words you're going to need. Pathogen, I will say all the time. Pathogen is a microbe that can cause a disease. Antigen is something that causes an immune response. And we will make a distinction between antigens and epitopes when we get to the adaptive immune system. Epitope is the part of the antigen that is recognized by the immune system or detected. So, big, important words to keep straight, especially when we get to adaptive immunity. Keeping these two straight and understanding why I say one versus the other will be very helpful. Let's keep going. Okay, so one thing we think about, why do we have immune systems? Well, we are food. Lots of different cells can eat our cells and tissues. What we are made of is the same thing that they want to be made of. Lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, amino acids, those are what every cell wants, and that's what our cells are made of. And then viruses. Viruses try to convert our cells into factories for making more viruses. That's all they do. And they outnumber us. So we need immune systems to protect ourselves from that. So our innate immune system primarily protects us from the huge number of random cells that would like to eat us, but don't really know how. And the huge number of viruses that would like to convert us into virus factories, but aren't quite sure how. They just aren't perfectly adapted to infecting a human. Our adaptive immune system is what protects us from the ones that are adapted to infecting a human, or the ones that do know how to eat us, and the ones that can get past the innate immune system. And the adaptive immune system protects us from other stuff, like really advanced cancers. It protects us from really advanced viruses, really sophisticated bacteria. It protects us from protein toxins, like the tetanus toxin or the tracheal toxin from diphtheria. So that's kind of amazing, and we will see how that works. Okay, so here we are looking at the major themes in immunology. So look for these as we go through it. Number one, the innate and adaptive systems work together, but they're incredibly different. So we are going to look at each one of these in turn, and my hope is that by the end of this, you will never mistake anything innate for anything adaptive. You will always see why they are called what they are called. Both of those systems need to identify the difference between an invader to fight and our own cells to protect. So they always need to be figuring out, am I looking at part of my body that I need to protect, or am I looking at something else I need to fight? And so we say, we use this concept of self to mean part of our body. And so the immune system has to be tolerant to self. Part of the immune system can generate memory. So the first time you're infected with a virus, like a cold virus, you have a different immune response than you do the second time you're infected by it. And the second time, your immune response is more powerful generally and protects you much better. To learn the immune system, you need to learn lots of different specialized cells. Lots of different specialized cells, and they go through development and activation. So they're not just sitting there ready to do their job as soon as they get a signal from the nervous system. They're not like muscle cells that are just like ready. They get a signal that says, okay, develop more. And then they get a signal that says, okay, activate. And those processes may take days. They have to go through big changes. So we have to pay attention to that development and activation. And something we won't look at in much detail, but it's a good thing to think about, is that immune responses over time get more and more specific for whatever they are protecting us from. Some of this, if you look through the curiosity slides, you'll see some details about this. So if you look at the optional slides at the end, you'll see a little bit about how we tailor immune responses increasingly over time. But what you will see is that like antiviral responses will be very different from antibacterial immune responses in most cases. Finally, immune cells use receptors to learn about the world, and they communicate using signaling molecules. The last thing I want to do in this particular video is review with you what a receptor is and what a signaling molecule is. If you are very confident that you know what a receptor is and what a signaling molecule is, then skip to the next video. But if not, here we go. First, a receptor. So a receptor, for our purposes, sits in the membrane of a cell, and it is a protein. So I draw it as a squiggle. But we also have to think about it has a specific part of it that acts as a matching part of some molecule it is trying to detect. So let's say it's trying to detect, well, that's not going to work, is it? Let's say it is trying to detect this red zigzag molecule. Well, it perfectly matches the red zigzag molecule. So its three-dimensional shape perfectly matches the three-dimensional shape of whatever it is trying to detect. So ultimately, if this cell bumps into this molecule, this receptor will perfectly fit it, and the receptor can communicate that somehow with part of itself to the inside of the cell. So typically what it's going to do is activate a second messenger protein, which will touch this and get converted into some other form that does something else in a cell. So this receptor protein will detect a molecule from outside the cell, and then as a result of that, it will change some molecule in the cell into another form, and that contributes to a regulatory network. So that will change the behavior of the cell. So this gives us two important words: receptor, and that's the protein that has all these three parts. It has the binding site, it has the part in the membrane, it has the part that affects what's going on inside the cell, and then ligand. The ligand is the molecule it detects. So immune cells have lots of receptors we have to think about. And then the other thing is a signaling molecule. And the idea here is that maybe you have a tissue with some beautiful enterocytes with their little nuclei. So these are not bacteria, these are human epithelial cells. Each one has its little nucleus towards the basal side, and this side would be a lumen of a small intestine, if these are enterocytes. So the general idea is, what if some nasty virus gets into one of these cells? It is possible for the cell to communicate with the other ones. This cell can then make a signaling molecule that it releases, and other cells have receptors for that signaling molecule. And if they detect that signaling molecule, their behavior will change. That's the whole idea, that cells can make these signaling molecules and release them, and if they touch other cells that have the right receptor, that other cell will know something, it will learn something. And we will see some examples of that. Okay, great. That's enough for this video. I'll see you at the next one.